Just me, a place to be me, where you get to experience life. 'Cause life is a journey, not a guided tour. If you want the rainbow, you have to go through the rain.
Welcome back, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. This month, we have talked a lot about the topic of sex, what sex looks like as far as conversations with our partners, concepts around how to have healthy conversations around sex. And today's topic, we're going to talk about having the conversation of sex and the importance of having the conversation of sex with your teenagers and with your children. So, without further ado, we're going to dive right in. With adults, now let me take a step back. So, I am in my 30s, and when I was growing up, I remember my parents telling me about sex. And the conversation around sex was, don't get pregnant, don't come home with a baby, because if you do, I am not going to help you raise the child. It's going to be your responsibility. I'm going to support you, but for the most part, you're going to have the responsibility of taking care of a child. And because who I am, I took that to heart and I really listened to what she said. And it was almost a impact of fear initiated into me instead of a conversation around relationships, around what can happen during sex, what my body as a female does if I'm interested in sex or if I'm horny. So I want to help use that example to help guide some healthier conversations. And again, my parents only knew and did what they felt was helpful at that time. They did the best they could with the information that they were given at that time. And so, knowing what we know now about social media, about entertainment, about development, healthy development with our kids, we're going to give you today, we're going to give you maybe some healthier ways of having that conversation with your teenagers. Because if you don't have them with your teenagers, they're going to have them, but you won't be able to really know what they're getting, the information and the resources they're getting their information from. So having open conversations with your kids can go a lot further than allowing them to get whatever type of knowledge that they do get from different platforms of entertainment, different platforms of social media, pornography, because let's be real, pornography is very accessible to our children. Okay? So one of the first things that we definitely want to encourage parents to think about when they want to start that conversation of sex is to start young, but be age appropriate with it. So, starting early with some of the basic things, with using appropriate words for the body parts, helping younger kids understand what safe touch is versus unsafe touch. Miss Smith, what do you have?
Yes, so as you expressed a few minutes ago, like really starting early with the basic concepts, and that can be introducing the body parts. As it relates to young males, they have a penis, and young females have a vagina. And when you have these conversations, you want to normalize talking about those body parts. And as you're talking to your younger children about these body parts, you can also encourage them or incorporate in that conversation as it relates to, boundaries. So
Mhm.
when it comes to young girls, this is my body, and express to them what does it mean as it relates to it being their body. And the same
Mhm.
thing with boys. And whenever you have that communication with them and normalize it to the point of letting them know that this is their bodies, and communicating with them what that means, which can go into boundaries. You're
And
teaching them,
permission,
yes,
consent. Mhm.
yes. So you're teaching them that it's their body and no one should be touching their body without their consent, as Miss Sasha just expressed. And when we have these conversations with them, we want to make sure that it's age appropriate. So for young children, ages 3 to 6, you want to stick to those body parts. But also during this time period, you also can incorporate where babies come from. You don't have to go into a lot of details about it, but just let them know that babies come from girls' bodies. And when it comes to preteens, ages 7 to 12, you want to start talking to them about puberty. So, between those ages 7 to 12, when puberty starts, their body starts to mature. And during that time when their body is maturing, they also have like emotional changes. So you have to let them know that during this time period, they may have an overwhelming of emotions. And with that being said, with the puberty, the emotional changes, you can let them know this is the basics of reproduction. So when it comes to females, you discuss things like menstruation.
Yep, their menstruation.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Body image and respect for themselves and others as they do that.
And
And
for
then
young, okay.
go ahead.
And also for just boundaries, how you want to be touched as far as as a person. So I know that sometimes just from working at the schools, we'll have um, kids running around either slapping each other on the butt or slapping each other on the head. And so really helping to communicate with your kids, hey, is that something that you would like done to you? Those are not appropriate touches, or those we need to find different ways of expressing ourselves instead of touching someone on body parts that they don't consent to.
And I know in therapy sometimes we have different types of exercises where you have the male body and the female body, and we talk about good touch, bad touch. And like you said, just getting them familiar as it relates to when people do touch you, is it a good touch? And if it's a bad touch. And then the more you talk about these things and the more they become familiar with their body, the more they will think about respecting their bodies and also communicating with others when someone does not when someone violate those boundaries.
Yes. Yes. Yes, that is very important, is giving your kids, especially ages 3 through 12, giving them the language and the comfort to really say, if somebody does touch them in an uncomfortable way or makes them feel uncomfortable, that they have the words and the comfort to express that to you, their caregiver, to say, hey, mom, dad, auntie, uncle, whoever, this is what happened. This person touched me and I felt uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And as we said, the more you talk about it, the more comfortable they will feel about about the situation, and the more comfortable you will feel um about talking about the situation. So as parents, you want to be very intentional by using opportunities to talk about this. Because as Miss Sasha says, we have social media, we have television shows, YouTube shows, and different types of radio broadcasts. And during these conversations as parents, you want to be very intentional as it relates to looking at these things with your kids and listening to these things so you can have conversations around them.
And
And go ahead.
I think that's a big part in talking to teenagers about sex, is that listening, even though there may be some generation differences as far as music interest and television interest, but really tapping in to what your kids are listening to, your teenagers are listening to, because a lot of the sexual innuendos that gets depicted in some of the social media sites, and then also some of the music, will create false narratives in our children, our teenagers' head about what sex is, about what consent is, and about how communication should be around sex, healthy relationships. So some of the music that our teenagers listen to, and even when I was growing up, some of the music that I listened to may have shed maybe some derogatory language on certain genders, or had some um, different acts that maybe were frowned upon by my mom. But if
Mm-hmm.
my parents would have had that conversation, like, oh, well, is this something that you would really want to be exposed to? Would you want to be treated this way? Or even if maybe parents, my mom or my dad would have asked me, so, have you had sex? Do you think you know what sex feels like? What does sex feel like? So having these open conversations, because if not, then you're leaving it up to some of the people who are singing songs about it. And I know when I was growing up, it was Genuine, it was Cisco the Thong Song. And so those can be very misleading to a teenager versus an adult.
That is so interesting. It's interesting you said Cisco. I was thinking about Cisco too.
Yep,
Wow.
yep.
Wow. And as we're talking about this, I'm just going to share a personal experience. This morning on my way to my son's school, I was driving him to school and he had his headphones on. And as he had his headphones on, I was being intentional with listening to the words that he was saying um out loud, which I couldn't hear the song.
Mhm.
Um and then I had to stop him. I raised my hand and he's like, "What is it now?" I was like, "You need to be mindful of what you're saying." And I told him why what he was saying was inappropriate. And I was telling him how he needs to be mindful as it relates to what he's listening to. Because the song may have had different additional lyrics to it, but I know what I heard just passing by or just being in the car with them. So you just got to be careful as it relates to or communicate to with your children as it relates to how the music that they listen to also can also steer their mind in a different or incorrect direction as it relates to sex. But as
Mhm.
parents or caregivers, once again, you have to be very intentional. Utilize your listening skills and ask questions to gain
Yes.
understanding as it relates to what is it your children is listening to and looking at. And the majority of the time, if you ask them, they will tell you because they do seek that attention and they seek that guidance. But
Mhm.
if we don't be intentional with giving it, we lose the opportunity to teach them.
Yes. Absolutely, absolutely. And it doesn't have to be a conversation that you have all at once. It's a conversation that you can build on gradually. So, um, if you're driving in a car with your teenager and they're singing some lyrics to a song and you happen to catch a phrase or a terminology that you want more insight on because you're trying to understand what your kids are saying, ask them, "Hey, yo, what does that mean?" Oh, have you ever experienced that? Oh, do you know anyone else who's experienced that? Okay. Have you ever felt that? Oh, okay. Well, what does a relationship look like to you? Would you know if you were in a relationship? What would you like a relationship to be? Because asking these questions, even if they get frustrated with you, they're still recognizing you're still opening that door and allowing them to possibly come back to you later and have that conversation. But by not introducing it, by not speaking up, you cannot expect for your kids to do it because again, they have lived on this earth less than you have. And so expecting your teen to come up to you and um, asking for insight about topics that you know more about than they do in different avenues and arenas is definitely going to be challenging for them. So you as the adult introducing these topics to your kid and leaving the door open to say, hey, If you want to further talk about it, I'm here for you. I'm here to listen. I'm here to give you some insight. And if I don't know, I can definitely figure out where we can get the answers together.
And just by you providing that information just now, by you asking those open-ended questions, that can encourage critical thinking with your kids too.
Mm-hmm.
Relates to, okay, is it what I think it is? So really asking open-ended questions that will allow their minds to start thinking about things. But also as parents and caregivers, we need to be patient, but also not be judgmental as
Mm-hmm.
we have these conversations. So we need to make sure that we approach them in a manner where we can receive the information that we're needing for clarity.
Yes. And also in addition to asking these questions, you will also be able to find out what information your kids still don't know about their own bodies. So, for example, with young females and their menstruation cycle, while our schools provide insight and education into their body parts just through sex education, there are also topics and concepts that the school does not provide sex education around. And so really thinking about that as far as hygiene during that time of the month for females, as far as hygiene for males with different genitalia areas. Those are important concepts that you also need to have. And it's not just about the act of sex, it is about taking care of your body. When we also think about the act of sex, what are the risks? What are the increased risks, of having multiple partners? And these are topics of conversation that if caregivers don't have with their teens are still going to have these conversations, but the information may not be the information that has enough validity to it.
Correct.
So it's definitely, talking to your teenagers about sex is never an easy conversation, but it is a conversation that if you start young and you continue to build on it age appropriately, it will allow for healthier choices in the future from your kids and from your teens.
Correct.
Okay. And I know that we've kind of been very vague about the specific topics around sex, and we've kind of just given you an overview. And we will dive into deeper topics and conversations later on in the year about how to really talk to your children about sexual orientation and sexual identity. But this is just a start to a conversation that will continue to go on as you continue to raise your kids. So, okay. Well, guys, thank you so much for tapping in with us. Definitely, until next time, take care of yourself so that we can all take care of each other. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to Just Me Therapy podcast. If you are seeking further one-on-one diagnoses, interventions, and treatment plans, please consider scheduling an appointment with an individual counselor at Journeys Counseling Center, located in Greensboro, North Carolina. Journeys can be reached at 336-294-1349. The mission of Just Me Therapy podcast is to use authentic conversations to uplift one's mind, body, and soul. The goal of Just Me Therapy is to offer affordable education and insight to individuals who experience financial barriers to accessing individualized behavioral health care services. With that being said, the information, including opinions, advice, and recommendations discussed in this podcast, are intended for individual, informational, and educational purposes only. Such information is not intended to substitute the recommendations of your own licensed therapist or healthcare professional. Although we are licensed behavioral health professionals, we are not your licensed behavioral health professional. As a result, the advice mentioned on this podcast should not replace the recommendations offered by your own qualified health professional.